G'day legends. As some of you probably saw in a recent video, I upgraded my monitoring to Genelec 8351Bs. Quite a big investment in my studio monitoring, jumping from the HS8s over to quite a high-end speaker. Now, that original video was a kind of unboxing, first impressions, getting it all integrated into my studio, that kind of thing. Now I've spent the last week doing some solid mixing on these, and I have a proper opinion that I can give you guys and just some serious thoughts about these speakers that I thought was worth a follow-up video for. Now, as you can see, I have changed the monitor setup from that initial video that I made. Originally, I laid them down horizontally and I had them in that flat setup, which does look really cool. But after doing some tests and some different measurements, I ended up changing them back to a vertical setup because the response I got was a lot better. Now, YouTube is such a great place for learning, sharing knowledge, and I love that I get to share tips with you guys, and I see a lot of comments all the time, people saying thanks for sharing this knowledge with me. But you guys share tips with me too, which helped me as well. So when I did that initial video and I showed the measurement of the speakers, there was some nulls and some weird things going on in the low end and just the overall response of the room. Now, a couple of people suggested a few things and I gave those a try, and it dramatically improved the response that I got. So I had a pretty big null in the low end on one of those speakers, and what was suggested was to push my desk back as far as I could to the back wall and then bring the speakers as close to the back wall as possible as well. So it's a big desk, it's got a lot of gear in it. Didn't really want to pull it apart, so I managed to shift it back as far as I could. And then I experimented with placing the speakers in different ways, horizontally close to the wall, vertically further out on those speaker stands at the top. And what ended up being the best result is where they are now, as close back to the edge as they can get to the wall before they're going to fall off, and then actually as close in on those speaker stands as possible, as opposed to being further out, which dramatically improved the response of the speakers in this space. So thank you to the guys who gave me those tips. Now, for anyone who's wondering, that's called speaker boundary interference response, which is when your speakers are far enough away from the wall that when the sound hits the back wall as they play and then it comes back to your listening position, it actually phase cancels and creates some nulls. So by pushing them closer to the back wall, which these Genelecs are designed to be placed close to the wall, in case you're wondering, because I know a lot of people think putting speakers close to a wall is a big no-no. That's what I thought, but the Genelec, the ones, have been created in a way that they work well when they're close to a wall. So perfect for rooms that might have some issues. While I did really like the way they looked laying down, I'm always going to choose whatever setup's going to give me the best response from the speakers. Now, as you can see, I popped the old Yamaha HS8s up next to the 8351Bs because I wanted to do a direct comparison so that I could tell you guys the big difference between going from a kind of budget-friendly monitoring system to something high-end that is quite expensive. Now, I know a lot of people would look at this and be like, that's such a big amount of money. Like, you could be, that's a waste of money. You could buy so many cool things with that. And you're right. You could buy so many awesome compressors, some really cool mics. You could get some killer guitars. There's so much that you could spend that money on. But if I'm being honest, after this week of mixing on these speakers, I really wish that I invested in this sooner. So take what you want from that. This isn't an endorsement or anything like that. I literally wish that I upgraded my monitoring a long time ago, because the difference between these and the HS8s is insane, and rightly so given that huge price disparity. So in comparison, the Yamaha HS8s are about $600 a pair, and the Genelec 8351Bs are about $9,000 a pair. So it's a huge difference. You can buy more than 10 sets of HS8s for one set of these. So it's pretty wild, right? But for me, as a professional who does this for a living, this is how I make my money, it's absolutely worth this upgrade. So I'm absolutely 100% happy with the purchase I made, happy to have these in the studio, and already they've made a big difference. If you're doing this as a hobby, I can totally understand that spending that kind of money on monitoring just doesn't really feel like an option. But as a professional, if you're doing this and making money and you are working on lower tier monitors like I was, I recommend that you start thinking about upgrading them. It's definitely the best thing that I have done in my studio in a really long time. So take what you want from that. So let's talk about where the improvements are. What have I noticed? So the big thing that I notice when I'm working on the Genelecs is I can just hear how bad things sound. I know that sounds really weird and maybe makes it feel like they're less enjoyable to work on, but they really push me to want to make the mix sound a lot better. For example, a couple of days ago, I was tracking drums in the studio and I could just hear everything about those drums that I wanted to fix. I wasn't satisfied sitting there and just listening to them the way they were. I really wanted to reach in there and start improving them. And when I started mixing those drums, it was really clear to me what I needed to do to get them to sound the way that I wanted them to. The HS8s, on the other hand, sounded a lot more forgiving straight away. So when I switched to those HS8s, the drums sounded better to me. Like they were already sounding pretty good, but I know that they're not good. I know that they needed more work to get them to that sound that they need to be when you export them and take them out of the studio. And this is the really eye-opening part of these 8351Bs, is the mid-range. The mid-range is really clear. It's really pronounced. You can actually hear everything that's going on, and particularly the low mids. I was talking to one of my mates the other day and he was sort of like, what's the biggest thing that you've noticed about these monitors? And I said, the low mids. Like, I can actually hear everything that's going on down there, and it's kind of scary. It makes you work a lot harder because that is such a crucial part of the mix. If you don't carve that area properly, your mix sounds muddy. If you carve too much out of that part of your mix, it sounds weak. And if you can't hear what's going on in that area, it's a lot harder to get that right. And the first thing I thought when I popped up the HS8s back next to the Genelecs to do a direct comparison was the HS8s sound like they've got more low end, like they've got a bit more sub. Like it was almost like, oh, hang on, the Genelecs, are they missing like this low end? But then I realized the HS8s are misrepresenting the mids. So there's a lot less information in the low mids that you can't hear, and it automatically flatters the sound a lot more. So you get used to this, right? When you're working on your monitors, you're going to get used to how they sound. But comparing to the Genelec, which is a lot more flat frequency, a lot more honest of what's happening, a lot tighter in the low end, it's a big difference because it helps you identify what needs work. Whereas listening to the HS8s after working on the Genelecs for a long time, it sounds like there's a hole in the audio. You can basically hear this massive dip in the frequency range. And I said that on an Instagram post. I posted a picture of the two monitors and I said that, gosh, the HS8s sound like they have a hole in it. And someone said, oh, you're just saying that. And I thought that was a really weird thing to say, but I understand that when you see someone like me making a video, I've just spent a huge amount of money on speakers. I'm going to justify my purchase. It's not like that. It's actually, I felt like I needed to do a second video to tell you guys just how much of an improvement these speakers have made for me and just how much better I can hear mixes and make decisions quicker and faster and more confidently. That's what's happening right now when I'm working on these monitors. Now, I was kind of worried going to the Genelecs because I had read this kind of thing about these speakers, that they're very honest. They're not, I guess, like exciting. They're maybe not very inspiring, but I guess it depends what you're looking for. And for me, it's all about translation. It's all about hearing the mix properly, being able to make decisions. And I can do that on these so much better. So if you're in that position that I was in, where you're just kind of like reading all about this stuff, reading people's opinions online, I totally get it because it's so hard to make a decision. One person will preach how amazing these monitors are and the next person will say how much they suck and they could never get a mix to translate. I guess everyone's different. Everyone has a different taste in sound and everyone's going to connect with monitors differently. For me, coming in completely blind into these monitors, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I was hoping for the best and I'm absolutely satisfied with them. So maybe as a bit of a testament to like the improvement these monitors have brought to the studio, the very first mix I did on these, I sent it to the artist. The next day they called me and basically said they cried when they heard the track because it was so good. And I've worked with this artist for a couple of years now. So to hear that was definitely a confirmation for me that these speakers have definitely helped me lift my game. Now, I'm not saying go and spend $10K on a pair of studio monitors because your mixes are going to be so good they're going to make people cry. That's not what I'm saying. You can do great mixes on HS8s. I'm not looking back at my mixes and saying everything I've done before I got these speakers is bad. Not in any way at all. I got to know those HS8s really well. But now that I'm working on monitors that convey the mix in a way I guess that's easier to interpret and make decisions on, I'm getting through my mixes a bit quicker, and I think it's only going to get better the longer that I work on these monitors. So for me, that is a really big thing. If I can get through mixing a song faster because I'm more confident, then the investment in these speakers has absolutely been worth it. I'm not saying that every mix I do from here on out would be perfect, but all the mixes that I've sent out since I've been working on the Genelecs, they've only been really small adjustments that people have asked for changes on, like, can you make this a little bit louder? Can you turn this down a little bit? Nothing like this is harsh or like this sounds a little bit muddy. Revisions have only been really small changes, if any. A couple of comments that I saw kind of pop up as I was reading about the 8351Bs were that people just couldn't get their mixes to translate on them. They loved the way they sounded, they were really pleasing, and they thought they were too pleasing and that they weren't mixing enough, so that their mixes weren't translating out of the studio. Now, everyone's different, but my experience has been pretty different in the fact that when I'm listening to things on this, I can really hear if something doesn't sound right, and I want to work on it more. And so I work harder to get the mix to sound good on these monitors. When I flick over to the HS8s, it already sounds a little bit shinier, a bit more polished. When I jump back to the Genelecs, I'm like, whoa, it needs more work. And so I will push myself harder. And then when I take it out of the studio, I'm like, this sounds great. And it's not always like that. There's a lot of times you take something out of the studio, you feel like it's so good, you listen to it in the car and you go, yeah, it needs a little bit of work. My experience with this so far is that everything that I've taken off of these monitors has sounded really good. And that's because I felt like it hasn't sounded good on these and I've had to work harder to make it sound good. And I think that's the point with these kind of monitors is they just make you work for it. And once you get there, the results are really cool. So if we're comparing the sound of the HS8s to the Genelecs, the HS8s have a looser low end, like there's a lot more sub that sort of seems to be dispersing and floating around. The low mids are kind of underrepresented. The whole speaker feels like it has more of a smiley face EQ when you compare it next to the Genelec. Now I know for a lot of people that makes them sound more fun and more exciting. And I know when I jump over to them, I'm like, I kind of get it. They're more hi-fi sounding straight away and a lot more forgiving. But I would say the upper mids are a bit harsher on the HS8s. They sort of jump out in a way that fatigues you a lot quicker. And the problem with that is after mixing on them for a while, you start to make bad decisions. So you might start to attack those upper mids because you feel like you're getting fatigued, like this area is hurting your ears. You know, you slap Soothe 2, Smooth Operator, any kind of resonance suppression plugin on your mix and start cutting things away. And then you listen to your mix somewhere else and you go, oh, it sounds really dull and dead. So that's the problem I think with the HS8s is that those upper mids do jump out. They are a little bit bitier. And just the higher frequencies overall on the HS8s do sound like they jump out a little bit more. Now the 8351Bs, the low end is a lot tighter than the HS8s. As I said before, this is because we can hear the low mids represented a lot better, but that doesn't mean that you can't hear those sub frequencies. They're there. They're just represented in a way that is a lot tighter and a lot easier to interpret. As I said before, the sub information on the HS8s feels like it's really pushed forward, which could make you want to cut that area a bit more if you feel like the mix is too boomy, but when you listen to it somewhere else, you might realize actually that low end is fine. Whereas the 8351Bs, because of how tight that low end is, you can make decisions about the low end a lot easier. How loud it needs to be, whether you need to cut anything, it's pretty easy to understand. Coming from the HS8s to the Genelecs, you might feel like the low mids is too much. When you're used to that scoop and that smiley face of a speaker, hearing all of that low mid is kind of confronting. But the longer you spend working on those monitors, the more you start to appreciate that because, as I said before, that's the key difference between these kind of monitors is being able to hear that and knowing how to carve it and shape it. So the representation of the mid-range, the low mids, the upper mids on a Genelec is really honest. So you can shape this, and when it sounds nice, when it sounds good on the Genelecs, it sounds good off of them. And I think that's really important. That's what I really love about these monitors is that mid-range. The high frequencies, yes, they're very smooth. They're very nice, but you can still hear when something is too harsh, when something's jumping out too much. It's very obvious. The whole frequency range across the 8351B just feels flat and honest. So in a way, when you listen to well-mixed music on the Genelecs, everything sounds really smooth, really nice. Nothing's like overly hyped. It just sounds honest. when you listen to a bad mix on the Genelecs, you can hear where all those things are jumping out. There's too much sibilance on a vocal, you'll hear that jumping out. If you can hear harsh resonances in electric guitar and synth sounds in cymbals, you'll be able to identify that pretty easily. One of the really big things I noticed about these is the Genelec's center image is so solid. They use the GLM corrective software. That center image is so punchy and it sounds so good. When I jump over to the HS8s, I can hear that there's not as tight an image down the center. These speakers disperse in a way that's sort of makes everything sound a little bit wider, and they are set up a little bit wider than the Genelec, so I do have to take that into account when I'm comparing these, but they sound much wider. Like the image down the center is not as punchy. I do have Sonarworks and an Audio Mini, which I was using with my HS8s previously, and that did help tighten up the HS8's center image a little bit by correcting some phase and stuff like that. But it's not on the same level as the Genelecs. The clarity and the punch of that phantom center is really amazing. And the overall stereo image is just very precise. And when you pan things out and get them balanced in the mix, when you set that level with the panning, it translates really well on other systems. That was always one of those things that I found when panning on the HS8s. When you'd listen to it somewhere else, the level felt not quite the same. So I really love that about the stereo field, and what I'm hearing with these monitors as well is that the imaging is really honest, and that translates to other systems as well. So I didn't really intend this to be as long-winded as it is, but I guess now that I'm kind of rattling my thoughts off about these speakers, this is what I think and feel about them. And I'm personally just really happy with these monitors, and if you are serious about mixing and you're working on stuff like KRK Rockets, Yamaha HS series, I would recommend that at some point you start looking into what's the next step up in monitoring. Is maybe not as big as jump as this, you know, like I've been doing this for over 15 years. I really should have invested in monitoring a lot sooner. But that being said, I do believe that you can learn to work on your monitors like I did with the HS8s. It's just that when you have something better, it makes things easier, I guess. Like that's the thing. Like when you have a better vocal microphone, you get a great vocal sound straight away and you don't have to work as much. There's less trickery and things that you have to do to get that good sound. It's the same with monitors. When you have good monitors, you can get that mixed translation a lot quicker than if you're working on monitors that aren't quite as honest and take a little bit more work to figure out what's going to sound the best once it leaves your space. So yes, jumping from HS8s to 8351Bs is huge, but this is also my bread and butter. This is what I do for a living, mixing and mastering music. It makes absolute sense that the front line of what I'm doing is top tier. Will I get rid of the HS8s? Probably not. It's nice to just have a second set of monitors that you can just flick between and compare to. Will I get another set of nice monitors? Probably. This has started something in me, I think, where I'm very curious about speakers and monitors. I think I have an illness for audio, you know, like when it comes to headphones, I had this obsession with headphones. I still do. Like when I see a nice pair of headphones, I want to put them on. I want to hear what they sound like, even though I already have some really nice sets of headphones. I'm like, what else is there? And I feel like I've got a little bit of a taste for that with monitoring now. I'm definitely curious to try some monitors that are kind of in that area between HS8s and something like the 8351Bs. It would be great to test out some different monitors. So you might see a little bit of that on this channel over time as well. And look, I get this video is maybe like a little bit weird because I'm comparing a two-way monitor to a three-way monitor, which is far more expensive, but you've got to be curious about that. Like what's the difference between jumping from this budget stuff to something high end? And this is my experience. If you're looking at high end monitoring like the Genelec 8351Bs, I hope this maybe helped give some sort of insight into what you could expect from jumping from something like the HS8s to them. But obviously it's really hard kind of talking about speakers and sound, and it's not exactly something that can translate across a video. Like I'm just saying words and giving my thoughts on these speakers. So I hope you found this helpful. Even if you're not interested in these monitors, maybe you found it interesting. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And remember, if you want to support this channel, you can check out the link in the description below to my website. I've got a range of drum sample packs and mixing courses over there. Grabbing that stuff is a massive support. If you missed that first video of integrating the 8351Bs into my studio, then check out this next video coming up.